Hey guys, welcome back to Much Ado About Nerd Things, where we take deep dives into anything and everything nerdy. My name is Lin, and I'm so excited to talk about what's been happening in the Loki series lately. Today we're going to cover a lot of grounds, like all the Loki variants that are important, where they're all trapped, and how I think they're going to get out. And I'm going to wrap it all up with who I think is really behind the TVA. So stick around until the end, and like and subscribe if you like the content, okay? Alright, let's get to it. So let's start with the most important Loki variant, Lady Loki / Sylvie. So in my previous video covering episode 1 and 2 of Loki, I theorized that they're going to be combining Lady Loki and Sylvie Lushton version of Enchantress from the comic, and I seem to have gotten it right. They seem to have combined the two into a brand new character that doesn't really have direct correspondence to either character in her story. They are calling her Sylvie. That's her alias now. She's not going by Loki anymore. But she's also female version of Loki, but Lady Loki from the comic is not a variant of Loki. It is Loki reincarnated. After Ragnarok, Loki hijacked the body that was meant for Sif to reincarnate into. In here, she seemed to have had a completely different life from our Loki or the comic book Loki, and she's simply a variant. And we have since found out that she's been on the run since she was a kid. And that's why she doesn't really know magic, because unlike Loki, who was taught by her mother, she never got that education. She's been on the run so long that Asgard is a distant memory. So why is she a variant? It's not because she was born with this female sex, because if it was, they would have picked her up when she was born a long time ago. By the way, I am now coming around to the idea that the sacred timeline is more of a collection of timelines rather than a single timeline, like I said in my previous video. I think what's happening is there is a single prime timeline that they consider to be the sacred timeline, and what they're doing is forcing a lot of other timelines to run parallel to the sacred timeline or be pruned, because if there is only one sacred timeline, how did this Lady Loki come to be? They left her alone forever, and when they pick her up, she looked to be about 8 or 9. And knowing how Asgardians age, it could have been a few centuries since she's been born. So that's not the timeline we know, and they let that run until something happened that they decided is a Nexus event. So the mystery there is, what is our Nexus event? Well, I think it is her capability for good. I think according to this twisted sacred timeline rules set by the TVA, Lokis are supposed to be villains. Because if you look closely, when she got picked up, she's playing with toys as Valkyrie, saving Asgard. And you can also see that when she's in the TVA and she sees that other guy in distress, this little girl who just been kidnapped from everything she's known doesn't say help me, it says somebody help him. Like, that is clearly somebody with a massive capacity for good, right? So I think that's why she got picked up when she did. Her capability to be a good person, not a villain, created a Nexus event which caused the TVA to come pick her up. And we'll come back to this theory later. This leads me to the Loki on Loki relationship that a lot of you guys are finding icky. People are saying it's a bit like incest, and I get that it's a little bit, what are you doing, step Loki? But they're not really related. It's not incest, they're the same person. And they're not like raised together or anything. And yes, they're both variants of each other, but they led very different lives. So I think rather than it being incest, it's more in every sense of the word masturbatory. Is it masturbatory or masturbatory? Masturbatory sounds like an observatory in which, moving on. Yeah, genetically they're still the same person though, because she is still called Sylvie Laufey-Dottier. So she is still the Ice King Laufey's child, just like Loki was. So I don't know what that means, but just to be safe, they probably shouldn't have kids. Which brings me to what caused the Nexus event, even though they were trapped in the apocalypse. No actions are supposed to cause a nexus event when you're in an apocalypse because everything and everyone around you is about to get destroyed. But something happened that alerted the TVA to their locations, a nexus event. So far, the show has been implying that it's love. It's not confirmed. Mobius teased Loki that, oh, is it love? But I think it's a red herring. I think we're going to get a confirmation that it's actually, once again, going back, I think it's Loki with the capacity for goodness. That is a massive nexus event that breaks through even apocalypses. Because if you look at it, it is this Loki's first time properly empathizing with somebody, which, yes, I say somebody, but it is still him. But it is at least a person external to him that he's coming to care for. And maybe that registered as a capability for good, which transcend even apocalypses. Before we talk about the other Lokis though, let's talk about Mobius. So in episode 3, we find out everyone in TVA are variants, kidnapped from the sacred timeline somewhere and brainwashed and their past wiped from their memory and made to work for the TVA. So we know Mobius is a variant. I don't think he's the first Mobius in the TVA. So Mobius in the comic, there's multiple versions of Mobius that work for the TVA. The Mobius we know here is actually called Mobius M. Mobius, and his middle name M does stand for Mobius. And there are other versions of him like Mr. Tesseract, no relation to the Tesseract we know from the MCU. The Tesseract is also an impossible shape in our dimension. There's also another version called Mr. Ouroboros, a reference to the snake eating his own tail, the Ouroboros, and another one called Mr. Paradox. So why I think this is not the first Mobius in the TVA is because remember, Renslayer keep Mobius trophies in her office, and there are trophies in there Mobius doesn't remember. And when Mobius pressed her on it, she says like, oh, you're my favorite analyst. She seemed to be like tongue-in-cheek, playing around with him. I think all the analysts are Mobius's until they figure it out what the TVA is doing, and then they get pruned. And I think those past trophies Mobius don't remember are other Mobius's trophies. Like Renslayer isn't lying. Mobius is her favorite analyst, is just that she's been through a few. So this brings me to, how much does Renslayer actually know? There's a lot of theories floating around about how important Renslayer is, and she clearly knows more than she's letting on, like enough to try and hide the fact that the TVA agents are variants, and she doesn't seem to be alarmed or upset by it. But does she know the Timekeepers were fake? Does she know who is really behind the Timekeepers? I know a lot of you are yelling Kang right now. I'll come back to it, okay? First, let's talk about different Lokis. So if you missed it, at the end of episode 4, there's a mid-credit scene that shows our freshly pruned Loki wake up to 4 other different variants of Lokis. And they are credited as Classic Loki, Kid Loki, Boastful Loki, and the 4th Loki is an alligator. So I guess we just call him Alligator Loki for now. So let's start with Classic Loki. So when we say Classic Loki, people seem to think, oh, this is probably the Loki from Golden Age of comics, right? But no, this is actually probably more accurately described as comic book Loki. For most of his iteration, this is what Loki looked like. Kind of like a creepy worm-tongue-ish old man that's just, out there to cackle and does villainous things. The Loki we all know and love was an original creation of the first Thor movie, and he have now since been integrated into the comics in like 2013. So for decades and decades, this is the classic version of Loki. There are stories about him going back in time to make sure he get adopted by Odin. He's a trickster, and he's kind of just evil for evil's sake. He's somebody who have leaned into the idea that he's being cast as a villain and is just going to continuously keep doing villainous things. So I don't know which way this Loki will go. Is he simply just an older Loki? If they're implying Tom Hiddleston will age into Richard E. Grant, no disrespect to Richard E. Grant, but that's rough. He seemed to be wearing a very comic accurate costume of Loki, and I can't wait to see more scenes with him. And I don't think you hire Richard E. Grant to play a throwaway joke. I think there's going to be more to him. So let's move on to Kid Loki. So Kid Loki is actually quite a recent creation as well. And I think he came into effect about less than a decade ago, and he's no longer around. So what happened in the comic is the Lady Loki I explained before, when she died, it turned out that she hatched a ploy and made a deal with Hela to erase Loki's name from the Book of the Dead so she can reincarnate. And that's how Kid Loki came to be. Since then, there's a lot of comic shenanigans, and he has been overridden and become the Loki we all know and love in the comics. Young, hip, fun Loki, basically. Once again, we don't know which way they're going to go with this character. It could just be a young Loki, or they could be doing the reincarnation after Ragnarok thing. So that brings us to boastful Loki, and there's been a lot of misinformation spreading about this Loki. Basically, nobody know anything about this Loki, okay? If anybody says this is this comic character or the other comic characters, they mistaken or just clickbaiting. Because a lot of people are likening him to worthy Loki from the comics, which is just a Loki who's worthy to wield Mjolnir. So basically, it's a Loki with Thor's power. He's not that, because if you look at his hammer, it's made out of like a piston and a railroad track cut and painted gold. It's not made from Uru metal, and it probably doesn't have a worthiness enchantment on him. He probably doesn't have the power of Thor. He just made a hammer and is wielding it. Maybe as homage to Thor, maybe to signify that he's surpassed or usurped Thor. Is he to Loki what Steel is to Superman? Is he somebody who taken on the mantle of Loki? So I don't know how these variants actually work. Do you actually have to be child of Laufey, adopted by Odin, to be a Loki variant? Or can you be somebody who have taken the title of Loki? Because, I mean, another one is an alligator, so I don't know what the rules are. And to people who are complaining that this is a black Loki, come on, guys. So you guys are okay with Asgardians, which are alien gods looking like humans, but you can't suspend your disbelief when they look non-white? We've already have Asian and black Asgardians in the MCU. Just get over it, okay? Which brings me to Alligator Loki. Well, there have been animal versions of Loki. There's one in the Spider-Pig universe, but he's not an alligator. There is an alligator in that universe, but that's Doctor Strange, and he's called Steaming Strange. I don't know how that worked. Did Loki shapeshift into an alligator and got stuck? Was there a curse put on him, or did Laufey get busy with an alligator? Honestly, we probably are not going to find out too much about this. This is probably just a visual gag. So one of the mysteries that will have to be answered in the coming episodes is, where are the Lokis now, and why was our Loki sent there instead of being killed? Which we all assume what pruning somebody does. Well, if you look at it in the background, you can clearly see they're in New York. You can see Stark Tower or Avengers Tower. My theory is they're in a universe where Loki won Invasion of New York. So basically, this is if the first Avenger movie ended differently. Because remember, Tony says that, there is no scenario in which you come out on top. And I think they're going to show that this is true, right? And I think this is where we're going to meet President Loki. President Loki, I believe, won the Invasion of New York and has since become ruler of Earth, Earth being this wasteland that he created. So why are they there? I think they're going to give us a lore reason why these variants aren't being destroyed, but being sent into apocalypses. I think they're being cut off from the multiverse and just kind of like just thrown away like garbage. What would Lokis want more than anything? For them to win, right? They were discussing in this episode about how it might be in the Loki's lot in life to lose. But here in a version of reality where a Loki won, it's crappy. They probably don't want to be there. So as for how they're going to get out of there, I think they're gonna have to learn to work together for the greater good, which I know sounds trite. But going back to my previous theory that variant Lokis being good, creating Nexus events, I think that's going to cause whoever's behind the TVA to have to come and check on them, or Sylvie, who's still at large and last we've seen has the upper hand against Renslayer, to notice the Nexus event and come get them. And that's going to be achieved by probably our Loki uniting them for the common good. I think that's how they get out of there. This brings me to the big reveal about the Timekeepers, which I called. I said they were probably not real or like long dead. So the big question becomes, who is really behind the Timekeepers? Now, I know a lot of people are saying Kang. Kang is the new Mephisto. But I don't think it's Kang, and I didn't guess him in my previous video because I think he's a little bit too obvious. I think there's a good chance that we'll get a Kang name drop or an after credit tease at the end of this show, but I don't think it's going to be revealed that Kang is the final villain that they're going to face off in the last 2 episodes. First of all, I know why a lot of people are guessing Kang. Yes, I know it's because Ravonna Renslayer is Kang's love interest in the comics. See, that's actually make me think it's more unlikely to be Kang because I think it's a red herring. If they're going to make it Kang, they wouldn't put Ravonna Renslayer so front and center in all the marketing and give us her full name. They didn't have to. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of variants and hidden identities here. They could have just called her something else, just like they did with Agatha. So I think they put her front and center to make everyone suspect Kang, especially seeing as Kang has been casted and confirmed for Quantumania. Which brings me to my other point. It's way too early for Kang. That movie is coming out in 2023. It's 2 whole years away. They're not going to introduce Kang properly in the last 2 episodes of a 6-episode TV series. Wait 2 years for him to make the first proper appearance. And yeah, I know Thanos was teased a long time before he actually made a proper appearance, but that's exactly my point. He was a tease. He was a after credit scene in the Avengers. Yes, he's behind the New York invasion in Avengers, in that it turned out that he gave Loki the Chitauri army, but he didn't show up in the last half an hour of the Avengers to start punching the Avengers. So I don't think it's going to happen here either. And yes, Kang means a lot to us comic book nerds, but he doesn't mean anything to the casual MCU fans because he hasn't been introduced or teased anywhere yet. It'll be like the Star Trek Into Darkness Khan reveal all over again, where majority of the moviegoers are like, who's Khan? Are we supposed to know who that is? Same thing. If they make such a big deal about Kang, most people are gonna go, who is Kang? And MCU still caters to these casual fans because these are $1 billion movies. They're not making this money by just appealing to the comic book nerds. So I think what's going to happen is at the end of this series, I personally think the multiverse is going to be restored. I think that will lead to a Kang tease. In the comic, Kang has an army of himself. He has an army entirely made out of different versions of Kang that he's plucked from different points in time. And in the MCU, there will probably be variant version of Kangs. And the sacred timeline has been probably keeping him from achieving that. But if the TVA is to fall and the multiverse is to be restored, he's probably be free to return. I think that will be the tease or the name drop at the end of the series. So this brings me to who I think is behind it all. I'm sticking to my previous guess. I think it's a version of Loki. See, like I said before, I think they've been setting it up since episode 1, the parallel between what Loki did and the philosophy Loki employs in the Avengers about how people are more free without freedom of choice, and what the TVA is doing to maintain the sacred timeline, to maintain order, taking choice away from literally everybody in the universe. That's the same. TVA is Loki's MO writ large. And what is our Loki's first instinct when he discovers what the TVA is and what it does? He hatched a ploy to take over the TVA. What if a different previous version of Loki have already succeeded? And I think there's been more clues to this since then. First of all, why did the Timekeepers take such a keen interest in these Loki variant cases? Because Renslayer herself said the Timekeepers has been very interested in the Sylvie case. And the next clue is when Loki and Sylvie are actually brought in front of the animatronic Timekeepers, they called them cosmic disappointment. That seems like a very pointed choice of word. I mean, why are they disappointments? Why would the Timekeepers have any expectations for these Lokis at all if they're just supposed to be villains? They would just be doing their villainous things, and why wouldn't they just prune them without hesitation? Why would they be disappointments unless you consider the idea that a Loki is behind them? A Loki would compare these variants to himself and consider them disappointment. And also, look at the lit up rune behind the animatronic Timekeepers. It looked like one of the runes in the Loki title sequence. It looked like a stylized version of that. And it's a show about many Loki. I think audience would be pretty accepting if the villains turned out to be a different version of Loki, because it's not a brand new person we've never heard of, never seen of before. It is just another variant of Loki. And we understand Loki. We understand his capacity for villainy. So I guess the question becomes, if it does turn out to be a Loki, what kind of Loki it will be? I mean, this is more a question of which actor do we think will play this version of Loki? Because if it is a Loki, it will be a brand new version of Loki. It's not going to be the Avengers Endgame timeline Loki. That Loki is most definitely dead. It's not going to be our Loki. It's not going to be a last minute heel turn, although it could be a future version of our Loki trying to steer our Loki into the situation in which he finally win control of the TVA. So I guess the front runner on which actor will play him will be Tom Hiddleston, right? But I think that I will put my money on Richard E. Grant, who's playing classic Loki as credited. Look, I don't think you hire Richard E. Grant to just throw in a funny costume to play a joke variant. I think he will make a great villain. And I think the idea of an old classic version of Loki is actually the prime Loki that's been pulling the string and has actually been super powerful all this time. I like that. I think that makes sense. A third option is it could be Sophie DeMarco / Lady Loki. It could be a different version of her, more in line with the comic book version of Lady Loki, who is evil and who has taken over the TVA, and who does consider our Sylvie a cosmic disappointment for her capacity for good. I think I would actually be disappointed if it turned out to be Kang out of nowhere, because we're not going to get proper development for Kang in the last 2 episodes. There's just not enough time. I wonder if other people will be disappointed if it turned out to be Loki, especially with a lot of Kang theories flying around. But I say give Kang time to breathe. Leave it and introduce him in Quantumania and keep him around for a major villain for phase 4, maybe phase 5, and even beyond. And it will make sense if he is created by the fall of the TVA and he is the Avengers messing around with time travel coming to bite them in the ass. I would say there are other candidates that could be behind everything, which I don't feel too strongly about. It could just be Renslayer behind it all, but we have seen her being a grunt in the TVA. If she's been behind it since the beginning, why has she been working her way up from grunt to judge? I don't think that makes too much sense. It could be a different variant of Mobius, but I don't think they've set it up at all. I think they've only set up for Mobius to be all the analysts. By the way, I don't think Mobius is dead. I think everybody they pruned, they have just been isolating it in Apocalypses. And I think we're going to see Mobius come back with other versions of Mobius. And I think when this series ends, when TVA has been taken down, I think a lot of the Mobius variants are going to take over and run it as a multiverse police instead of these manipulated thugs protecting a sacred timeline. I mean, wildcard, it could be Casey, who doesn't know what fish is. But look, my money is still on Loki. Who do you think is behind it all? Who do you wish it is? Would you be disappointed if it turned out to be Loki? Or would you be disappointed if it turned out to be Kang? Leave your comments down below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm so excited to see more of this show, and I'm so excited to make more content on it. So subscribe and click that little bell icon so you get notified when I make those videos. All right, guys, that's it from me for now. As always, peace.